All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Conroe ISD Audit Committee meeting. Today is January 11th. The time is 7:30. We will begin with our first agenda item, which is citizens' participation. Because a quorum of the committee of the board is present, anyone who is registered and would like to make public comment on items posted on the committee's agenda are welcome to do so at this time. I believe we have anybody signed up present?
We have not.
Okay. All right, thank you. Well, then we'll move to item 2, which is nominate and approve selection of the audit committee's chair. And I'll just to share, I know we have some new members of the audit committee this year. Thank you, first of all, for agreeing to serve on the audit committee bright and early when we do these meetings. And so thank you for getting here and fighting through the traffic. Let me just share with you a little bit about the role of the chair so that you know what it is that you are either signing up for or avoiding, as it may be through this process. But it's not an overly taxing position, but it's you know, you would, as the chair, you would lead these meetings. So you'd be the presiding officer over these meetings. Certainly, any audit committee member can ask for items to be added to the agenda, but I work directly with the chair on the agenda for each of these meetings. And then really beyond that, the only additional duty is working directly with me to do the annual review of our internal auditor. So if you look at our organizational chart, you see that our internal auditor is a direct report to both me and to the board. So typically I work with the audit committee chairs. We do Mr. Hayden's annual review, and we go from there. It really only becomes challenging and taxing when it's time to hire a new internal auditor. Brian's going to stay here for at least 15 more years because he does a great job. It's what he's told us, right? Like, he's not going anywhere ever. So that challenge will be off the table because we got it right when we hired him. So hopefully we're not going to be at any point to have to deal with that. So beyond that, that's really the roles of the position. And I will turn it over to you all for nomination discussion, and then once you've selected your chair this morning, we'll hand the meeting over to the chair and keep moving.
So as the president of the board, I'm not eligible to be the chair on this. So
I know you're heartbroken.
I'm not heartbroken. I'm not heartbroken.
I'd like to go ahead and nominate Ms. Chase, who is an auditor by trade, to be presiding chairperson.
Thanks. I accept the nomination.
Motion, we have acceptance. Is there a second to that nomination?
I'll second that.
A second. What she says with a smile. Okay. Any discussion or conversation about that? All those in favor of Mrs. Chase serving as our chair? I think so, yes. Yeah. Unless you don't want it, I guess. So, okay. So, Ms. Chase, congratulations.
Thank you.
And I think one of the things there's a lot of things that make our school district great, but when you look at our ability to have an audit committee as a school board and have a lead internal auditor from a Fortune 100 company in the world serve as the lead of our audit committee, it just shows you the level in which we operate. So we appreciate your willingness to do that, and it is your meeting now. So.
Do I get a script or?
No, just item 3, and we'll just roll right down the agenda.
Okay, it's a steep learning curve here. All right, moving on to item 3, consider approval of minutes from the September 14th, 2022 Audit and Investment Committee meeting. It seems like so long ago.
I know.
Is there any motion to change anything, or?
I move we approve the minutes as presented.
Second.
All right, don't I?
You just said motion, second. Ask if there's any discussion.
Any
if there's
discussion?
Not, then a vote.
Vote. All those in favor?
And you have to vote as well.
Oh, of course.
There you go.
All those opposed? So nothing. Okay.
Item passes, and then you go to the next one. Perfect.
All right, item 4, receive presentation of annual comprehensive financial report, including any changes, issues, and general comments related to the annual financial report by Sarah Roberts with Weaver.
I think, Mr. Rice, you're going to make an introduction for us?
Yeah, she's in.
Well, congratulations, Chairman
Thank
Chase.
you.
Members of the Audit Committee, it's my pleasure to introduce Ms. Sarah Roberts. She is partner with Weaver, who is our external auditor. They have been our external auditors for about the past 14 years. But before I ask her to come up, I would be remiss not to introduce really the 6 ladies who, in this team of accountants that you see here, this is every accountant we have in our department is represented here. These ladies do an excellent job for us. You will see there's no management comments in this report, and there has not been probably for the last 14 years. And as far as I'm concerned, they are the best finance team there is in the state, and I think Ms. Roberts will back that statement up. So I just wanted to tell them thank you for a great job. We really appreciate everything that they do for us. And with that,
That's
Yeah,
right.
thank you.
Plus, we have the
Introduce Ms.
Transparency Awards to prove it.
Indeed.
So, yeah.
Absolutely.
I'd like to introduce Ms. Sarah Roberts.
Thank you, Darren. Good morning. My name is Sarah Roberts. I'm the district's Weaver audit partner, and I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about the scope of our audit, the type of audit we perform, our audit results, and I'll spend some time going into the actual financial statements themselves, kind of at a high level. Happy to take questions at any time. Okay. Before I get into it, I want to just, share my agreement with Darren. We at Weaver, we work with a lot of school districts in the state of Texas, from the very largest to some of the very smallest. And so we see a lot of different shapes and sizes and a lot of different makeups of accounting and finance departments. And I can just say that I agree with Darren. Your finance department is really second to none. We have not had findings of material weaknesses or significant deficiencies in internal controls or non-compliance or anything like that since our tenure as the district's auditors. And I can assure you that if we did have those observations or those findings, we would report them to you. That's our job. So if there were issues, if there were control deficiencies that we identified during the course of our audit, we bring them to your attention. So the fact that there have been none for so many years really says a lot to the competency and proficiency and attention to detail on the part of your personnel. So I wanted to second that commendation. Really a pleasure to work with. All right, so starting off, this first slide is just about the timeline of our audit. This is consistent with previous years. It's really an annual cycle. Here we are today. We've wrapped up our audit today, and then we'll meet with the board next week. And then from there, we'll start with planning for next season. The type of audit we perform, this is consistent with previous years and is the same across all school districts in Texas that have federal awards, is known as a single audit. There's 2 components, a financial component and a federal award component. The financial statement audit component is conducted in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards, which is known as GAS, as well as the standards that are specifically applicable to governments in government auditing standards, also known as the Yellow Book standards. The standards applicable to the federal awards audit are included in the U.S. Code of Federal Regulations 2 CFR 200, commonly known as the Uniform Guidance. We issue 3 reports at the conclusion of our audit. The first 2 pertain to the financial statement audit. The third pertains to federal awards. The first is our opinion on the financial statements in our independent auditor's report. The second is our Yellow Book report on internal control over financial reporting and on compliance. And the third is our Uniform Guidance report on federal award compliance, which includes our opinion on compliance as well as the results of our testing of internal controls over compliance. So those are the reports that we issue. Those are the standards applicable to our audit. Going into our results, on our report on the financial statements, we issued an unmodified opinion, which is a clean opinion, the highest level of assurance that we can provide that the financial statements are free from material misstatement. In our Yellow Book report on internal control over financial reporting and compliance, this is a clean report as well. As I already mentioned, no material weaknesses, no significant deficiencies, no material non-compliance. In our third report, our federal awards report on compliance for major programs and internal control over compliance, also an unmodified or clean opinion, no material weaknesses, significant deficiencies, or other findings. With our major program testing for federal awards, we achieved coverage of about 50% of total federal expenditures, which in total were close to $100 million this year. Other matters, we as auditors are required to communicate to you certain items upon conclusion of our audit. One is material misstatements. If we had identified material misstatements in the financial statements, we would be required to communicate those to you. We did not identify any material misstatements. No transactions that lacked consensus, no difficulties or disagreements, and no impairments to our independence. As auditors, when we provide services to one of our clients that are outside the scope of the audit, we call those non-audit services or non-attest services. Anytime we do those types of services for an audit client, we have to consider any effects on our independence. We have two non-audit services we do for the district. One is a separate department within our firm has provided some services to Mr. Hayden in the internal audit context. Totally separate teams, no crossover, no bearing on our external audit. And the second is we've provided assistance with preparation of the notes to the schedule of expenditures of federal awards, which is 2 pages within the 160-page ACFR, Annual Comprehensive Financial Report document. And we really do that just as a convenience, no significant involvement on our part as it comes to that. Okay, any questions on this point before I go into the actual financial statements?
Question is, you're working with other districts, and
Thank you so much.
as far as the reports that are provided to you, do you see any reports from any other districts or anything else being reported from other districts that you see and say, this is good, I'd like to see this in other districts that we may not be doing?
So there have been some times where we have discussed alternatives in presentation, note disclosures, but really a couple things to note on that front is one, your finance team is already on top of that. They review the financial statements of other school districts, especially those school districts with fiscal years ending June 30th.
Oh, wow.
So those are out before yours are. They generally are reviewing those to look at what they're doing, what those financial statements look like, and also Conroe ISD, as well as the minority of school districts in Texas really participate in the GFOA program that subjects the financial statements to review by the GFOA, Government Finance Officers Association, a higher level of scrutiny for review annually, and gets feedback from that organization annually. So really there's suggestions kind of across the board coming in.
That's pretty impressive.
Not to brag on us, I would think with the other districts looking at our financial statements and our presentations, trying to determine what they can improve on. So,
Well, I didn't know that y'all looked at other districts and compare. I mean, I know you do. I'm sure you do, but I didn't know that we were doing those things as well. So that's fantastic.
There's not a lot. I'll talk about some of the accounting changes this year, but there's generally not a lot of accounting requirement changes year over year. When there are, sometimes they're really big, but just year to year, normal year, there's not a lot of changes. And so with this kind of process of continual review and review of other financial statements in the GFOA review process, we wouldn't expect a lot of changes each year. So generally pretty consistent.
And GFOA stands for what again?
Government Finance Officers Association. And you'll see, I don't know if you have a copy of the full document, but if you do, or if you see one later, included within the first few pages is the GFOA Certificate of Achievement. This page here is page 8, XIII.
Okay.
So each year, after the GFOA reviews the ACFR, the GFOA will provide comments, suggestions for improvement, or sometimes general questions that they have for the district to consider and incorporate in their next financial report. And because like I said, there's not a lot of changes year over year. The GFOA comments, they're always going to have something. There's always going to be some point of feedback. This is 160 pages, so there's going to be something. What we've seen is those comments kind of decreasing. There's always going to be something, but it's to the point now where it feels almost like a little bit of a reach. You know, they have to provide a comment, so there's going to be a suggestion where it's just so minor that you wouldn't notice year over year. So
Okay.
lots of review of these financials.
Can you go back a couple of slides? I think maybe 2 or 3 back where you mentioned federal funding. Yeah, right there, major programs.
Mhm.
Okay. But that's not a conclusive list. That's just.
Oh, no. Those are just the major programs. So all federal programs included towards the back of the financial report is a schedule of expenditures of federal awards. You can find that starting on page 154. It's a 2-page schedule, and that is an exhaustive list of all of the federal awards. So Title I.
Does it include a breakdown of this
Yes.
one?
It looks like this. I know you can't see it from here,
Okay,
but it's
yeah.
detailed.
Good.
Ms. Roberts, you mentioned that Weaver has provided, or maybe Mr. Rice did, but one of you has suggested or reported that Weaver has provided this external audit for 10 years. Is that?
About 14.
About 14. And so has it been similar makeup of the team, or how consistent has it been with the same people reviewing year over year?
There are generally, so the core team has remained pretty consistent. Out of the last 14 years, I have been involved in the audit for probably 8 or 9 of those years. I haven't been a partner at Weaver for 14 years. We have, our team generally consists of a primary engagement partner, who is me, and then we have a manager or senior manager who reviews the entire audit file and is involved in the direction of the team. And we have 1 or 2 senior associates, and then 1 or 2 audit associates that are doing, I guess, you know, the grunt work. And we also have a second partner that does a kind of overall quality control technical review at the end of the day. That second partner usually rotates every 2 years. We do our very best to keep our senior associate level and our manager level consistent, because there's a learning curve. You know, we get to know you, you get to know us. There's efficiencies there. It makes the process a lot better. Our current team of senior associates has been on the engagement 2 or 3 years. We have had some turnover, just like it happens, right? And also with COVID and kind of the different environment, we've had some of our personnel have transitioned to a full-time remote environment. You know, things have just been shaken up a little bit. But this school district, this audit is one that our staff and our professionals want to work on because of the professional environment and because of the quality of financial reporting. It has been, we've been fortunate enough to keep a consistent team there. But we do also shift our manager role probably every 3 to 5 years, if not for reasons of advancement or turnover, just to kind of, get a new perspective.
Okay, thank you.
We do also, I wouldn't necessarily consider this part of like the engagement team, but we have annual internal inspections, and this audit has been selected for inspection probably 2 or 3 times in the last 14
And
years. So
that's
another review.
just an additional quality review?
Yeah.
Yeah, all right, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, going into the financial statements, this first slide, this is a lot of numbers, a lot of colors. I'll walk through it. But what I'm showing here on the right is the district's statement of net position, which is the first financial statement. You'll find it on page 12 if you want to see the full version. And what this is the balance sheet of the district as a whole. So all of the district's various individual funds rolled up into a single presentation. And you'll see here also items, longer-term items, capital assets, debt, that you would not see in the fund financial statement. So this is really the balance sheet of the district. On the left, I've included more of kind of a condensed presentation with the major types of assets and liabilities, so cash and investments, capital assets, bonds, etc. with the bottom line being total net position, which is like the equity on a balance sheet. So I've highlighted a few things. In yellow are the pension and other post-employment benefits line items. And I've highlighted those because, as you can see, they're not the largest piece of your financial statements. The biggest things going on here are capital assets and bonds, which are, you know, $1.6, $1.8 billion. But the pension and OPEB are really sensitive estimates. They're actuarial valuations. They're big numbers, and they're kind of grayish, I guess I would say. And so I like to exclude those and talk about them separately when we're looking at the financial statements of a district, because they're just kind of oddballs. And I'll talk about that more a little bit later. But one thing to notice is that the total net position this year, including those items, is $30 million. A little over $30 million. Last year was a deficit of $12.7 million. So it swung from deficit to positive. But if you exclude those pension and OPEB items, each year you were in the positive, approaching $400 million. So those numbers, like I said, not the biggest thing on your financial statements, but have a significant impact on your net position. Increase in net position, if you exclude those OPEB and pension items, was a little over $30 million. From a high-level view, the biggest things happening in your financial statements year over year, biggest things affecting your financial statements, I should say, issuance of bonds in 2020, 2022, A, and Series 2022. In total, that resulted in an addition of about $340 million in debt, as well as, you know, the cash investment balance increase. Construction, ongoing construction, completed construction, resulting in asset additions, increased federal and state funding. Your federal and state funding increased about $30 million or so. And there was a new GASB accounting standard. I mentioned earlier GASB 87, which was the lease standard. The line items are highlighted in blue on the financial statements where that's affected. But at the end of the day, the net impact of that standard was less than $15,000. So you've got 5 line items on your financial statements, but net impact less than $15,000. Any questions on this one before I move on? Okay. So that was the balance sheet of the government as a whole. This next slide is more narrowly focused on the balance sheet of the district's general fund. The lease items from GASB 87, I've highlighted the blue items. Those are the new this year related to the standards. Again, the net impact is pretty small, about $16,000 on the fund financial statements. Fund balance of the general fund remained pretty remarkably consistent year over year, with an increase of about $1 million each year. Unassigned fund balance as a percent of total fund balance hovers around 95%, which means that the majority of your fund balance is unrestricted, unreserved, available for expenditure. General fund statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance. This is like the income statement. As I mentioned before, not a big change in fund balance of the general fund this year. Is about $1 million, which is really the goal, right? I mean, you're not trying to build up an unnecessary reserve in your fund. Unassigned fund balance as a percent of expenditures hovers around 30% each year, 29% this year, 31% last year. And that means basically if you were to not, as of August 31st, 2022, if you were to shut down, not receive any revenues, which, you know, is never going to happen, but if it did, you could continue operations for about 4 months. It's a good position to be in. Okay. Following the basic financial statements, you move into the notes to financial statements. Those start on page 27. Here are some of the more significant of the note disclosures. These are all consistent with last year. The only new standard, like I said, was the lease standard, with a pretty small impact on the financial statements. Included in the notes, I want to touch on a couple of them. The note 13 and 14 for the pension and OPEB, these note disclosures include a sensitivity analysis that shows the effect of a minor adjustment to the actuarial formula, what effect that would have on those balances reported. So that top table, the pension liability reported is about $86 million, if the discount rate involved in that measurement was adjusted by 1% either way, that would result in a swing of up to $100 million. Same with the OPEB. If the discount rate or the healthcare trend cost rate was adjusted 1% either way, you could have a really significant swing there. So that's one reason I like to kind of pull those out when looking at the financial statements as a whole, because there's a lot of assumptions and significant inputs in these measurements that just can really result in some big swings.
Hey, Sarah, could you explain to our new members what OPEB is, where it's coming from our TRS? Just kind of give them a brief description of really what that is.
Sure. So Teachers Retirement System, TRS, is the benefit system covering the pension, and then TRS Care for the OPEB. The OPEB is other post-employment benefits. So all of the retirement benefits, health care, for your retirees other than the pension. That's the OPEB. And so what the district reports on its financial statements is a proportion of the collective liability of the TRS system. So TRS and TRS Care reports a liability representing a projection of all future benefits for retirees, you know, which involves a lot of estimates, mortality estimates, demographic assumptions, all that kind of stuff, projecting those benefits and then discounting it back to present value. So there's where the discount rate comes in. That's the total liability of the TRS system. The district reports a small piece of that based on its share of the employees, the contributions that are made on behalf of those employees. So the district is paying with its payroll, every payroll period, a contribution to TRS, and that's the extent of the district's obligation. So this is not a liability that is going to come due next year or in 10 years or anything like that. It's an actuarial measurement.
Could you give us an example of a particular benefit that would fall under the OPEB? You know,
so your retirees that participate in the TRS, is it active care or is health insurance after retirement? Yeah, so TRS Care, health insurance after retirement from active teaching, they still are able to participate in the district's health insurance coverage.
Okay.
And so just, I guess for a little bit of context, the pension accounting standard for governments became effective, I think, 8 years ago. 8 years ago. And then the other post-employment benefit plan standard became effective, I believe it was 5 years ago. So before that, these numbers were not in the district's financial statements at all. The district just recorded its contribution as an expense to the system. So these are big numbers, and so that was kind of a shock when these numbers came on to all these school districts' financial statements. Like my first slide on the financial statement showed, last year you had a deficit net position of like $12 million. A few years ago, I think that was like $40 million deficit, when before all of this pension and OPEB, you were always moving along with your positive net position, and then all of a sudden this shock. It has been decreasing year over year, but there's, you know, the fluctuation, and I'll talk a little bit about the fluctuation from last year to this year just to kind of illustrate that point. Any other questions? And this isn't something that if you wanted to, you cannot pay this off. You can't reduce this. This is just a reflection of the TRS system as a whole, really. Okay. So that's a significant estimate. There are a number of other estimates included in the financial statements. The IBNR, incurred but not reported insurance claims, state funding revenue subject to revision and change, allowance for uncollectible property taxes is an estimate, and the basis for those estimates all comes from historical experience or from third parties, TEA figures or actuaries. And I'll just mention, if I didn't before, that the TRS figures, the pension and the OPEB, all of that is reported from a third party. TRS provides that information. After the notes to the financial statements, you'll find the required supplementary information starting on page 60. including a budget to actual schedule for the general fund, more pension and OPEB schedules, and then after that, additional supplementary information with combining fund schedules and individual fund schedules, followed by the statistical section, starting on page 99, with generally 10-year trend information of financials and demographic and economic information. So like I mentioned, I was going to get into the pension just a little bit more to show a change from last year to this year. And I included this because I thought if you look through the financial statements, you would probably have a question here. Because last year, the top part here is a schedule from your financial report that's included in that RSI section that I mentioned about 63 or 64, or sorry, 62. And that schedule shows 8 years of information. I've just included the last 3 to illustrate my point. And so that first line is the district's proportion of net pension liability. So like I mentioned, the district records just a piece of the total pension liability of the system. And you can see that's around 0.3% each year. But the next line is really what I wanted to point out. District's proportionate share has gone from last year, 165 million to 86 million.
Right.
So it's almost cut in half. The state's proportionate share of the net pension liability also decreased. What that is, that's not on the district's financial statements, but what that is that the state is actually paying most of the pension benefits for the district. And so the state recognizes that part of its liability is associated with the district. That's an informational item. Districts cover payroll has increased each year. And then the ratios are reflective of that decrease in pension liability as a percent of payroll. So what happened here is this. So I talked about the pension liability representing the projection of future benefits back to present value. So the net pension liability is that net with those assets that are accumulated from contributions and set aside to fund the liability. So the net pension liability is essentially the unfunded pension liability. To complicate things a little bit more, what the district is reporting on its financial statements as of 8/31/2022 is actually the net pension liability measured as of 8/31/21. That's how it works. So what happened was for the TRS fiscal year ending 8/31/2021, TRS's investment returns were outstanding.
Yeah.
They have a diversified portfolio consisting of equities and everything like that. 8/31/2021 was a great year for them. And so that fiduciary net position, which is the accumulated assets that are invested to fund the pension, grew. So total pension liability also grew. The fiduciary assets grew more. So that decreased the net. I suspect that next year when we're looking at 8/31/2022,
It will flip. Yeah.
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 We'll
But
see.
I mean, there's nothing we can do about that. It is what it is.
It is what it is, and that's why I like to kind of point this out and also take those out of kind of the big picture view. So,
So you're saying that explains the difference between 21 and 22?
yeah.
Yeah. Basically, the overall pie, I guess, got bigger. So the part just remaining for us to get a whole pie decreased, because the things positively in there grew so much in value that the little piece we had to make it whole decreased. Yeah.
So TRS is for their fiscal year 2021 had an investment income of something like $40 billion.
Yeah.
A normal number for them is like 10 or 15.
I just want to clarify this for us lay people that don't understand it quite at the same
Well,
level that you
pilot's
do.
pretty
It's just
easy.
that we have no control over this.
No.
This is just happens. It's
Yeah.
it's happened this year. It's going to happen next year. There's nothing that we can do to affect it or impact it in any one way or another. Just,
Right.
I agree with that, but with that prudent practice, it shouldn't have that big of a swing on an annual basis. I mean, I understand they're diversified, but they should be conservatively diversified because these are guaranteed fund accounts for teachers. So I get what you're saying, but I would hope that the following year, even though it was a bad in the equities market, that we wouldn't have such a big equity position that it would fluctuate that
Yes.
much.
I think that it will fluctuate, but I don't think it's going to completely reverse. Because you're right, I mean, there
And
should
school
be
districts have to have an
Yeah.
accounting for that as well, and you can't keep hitting school districts with
Yes.
big numbers like
Yeah,
that.
how rare was this? I mean, if you look at a 10-year period, how rare was that big gap?
So pretty rare. In the schedule, so this starts on page 62, there's actually 8 years of data. There are some swings in there. The other thing that will affect those swings is, like I said, this is an actuarial measurement, and they revisit, the TRS actuaries will revisit their estimates and their calculations, and they may tweak some things. So the discount rate used, for example, has been adjusted here and there a little bit, and so that will also cause a change in the liability. So there's a lot of factors, but let's see. So another big swing looks like was in 2018, which would have been the TRS fiscal year in 2017. The pension liability decreased by about $20 million, and then the next year it increased by about $80 million.
Yeah.
So, which is the 2018. So there are some big swings there. So to that point, somewhat, and to add a little bit of fun to the pension accounting is, for accounting purposes, there is recognition that these swings can cause these kind of crazy fluctuations. And so the second part that I have here in the slide shows how these are kind of smoothed for financial accounting purposes. Because these measurements are a year behind, and because there's recognition of the nature of these estimates being so subject to change, these big swings for accounting purposes are deferred from the income statement, essentially. So we're not recording $80 million of revenue. This is deferred as a deferred inflow on the balance sheet and amortized. If that makes sense. So at the bottom, 2021, 2022, the total pension effect on the financial statements is the liability, which is what we've been talking about, plus and minus the deferred inflows and outflows of resources, which are on the balance sheet. For the net effect, 2022 of 117 million. Last year was 128. So that's a $7 million swing rather than 80. So your financial statements do see it, but that entire swing doesn't go through like your income statement.
So for the TRS and those that manage that, who controls the investment objectives of that? Who has influence over that?
So TRS board of directors, they have a TRS advisory or investment advisory board. So it's a division within TRS, and so I think that there's appointed and elected government. It's statewide, state government.
I understand. I just didn't know if school districts had the ability to have influence on that as well, because at the end of the day, to your point, it does impact school district to some level on what they need to contribute. And
I am aware that TRS does have an advisory board that is made up of actual school board members and superintendents on that advisory board also.
Okay.
And then I know they have staff members that are in charge of their investment, as well. And then, like you said, advisory boards that, as members of TRS, there are times that, we're asked to vote to place people on, meaning like individual educators. It comes through TRS. And then the governor and TA appoint some positions as well. So that and I don't know what their total, it is a giant fund of money, so it gets a lot of
it is.
You're going to see their investments in all markets.
Yeah.
They're not just limited, like we're very conservative in what we're able to invest our funds in. They're in all markets.
Which is a bit contradictory to me.
Right.
It's a bit contradictory that they don't follow their own rules that they guideline by the school district.
And when I asked the questions years ago, and I'm trying to remember, it's just that the volume of money that they have is so large, it can change markets in itself. They're basically required to be in all the markets.
How often does that recommendation request come to you? You said you receive a recommendation request or?
It's part of everybody that's in TRS. So annually, we'll get and you're a member of TRS, you get annual reports from TRS, and there'll be times where you'll get, a report saying there's an empty vacancy to, vote as a body of all TRS members if you want to place somebody on the board. So I think we get quarterly statements. They used to mail them, now they come electronically. So, and
Just like with any stock
honestly,
you own.
I'm far enough away from retirement that I don't pay too close attention yet to them, because it's so far out. So, but that's yeah. So who knows? But it is a big system, and
It's not, I sound like I'm complaining. I'm not complaining. I'm just, the swings, I would think, would be a little bit better mitigated for school districts, especially when they've got to write a check to the TRS, which TRS is it's a guaranteed retirement account for teachers, and should be, I would think, would be a little bit more stable. That's all.
So what the district is paying is not influenced really by this
Yeah.
swing. The district is paying 7%, 7.5%, or actually, a little bit less than that probably, each year.
This is more like a balance sheet impact than a cash flow.
Yeah.
So there's a note disclosure in the financial statements that contains more information that you might be interested in. Note 13 starts on page 47, and it starts with the establishment of TRS as a Texas government entity, essentially. But what you might find interesting is on page 50, there's a table. Most of the note disclosure is really about the accounting for it, so it may not be as interesting as like the actual substance. But on this page 50, it looks like this. There's a table of TRS's target portfolio with asset allocations and target returns, which kind of goes to your questions. And TRS also publishes an annual comprehensive financial report, which is publicly available and includes investment information. It's available on their website. Okay, so those are the high points of the financial statements. There's a lot more in this document, but those are just kind of high points and points that I thought might be of interest. Lastly, I want to mention that there's a new accounting standard that will be effective next year, which really this year, fiscal year 2023. This is GASB 96 on the subject of subscription-based information technology arrangements. And what this does is it basically takes the lease standard and takes the requirements to record the intangible asset and the liability for leases and applies those to the software-based arrangements. Those software subscriptions that were scoped out of GASB 87 are now going to be scoped in to GASB 96, and it's going to require accounting similar to leases. It's going to be a lot of work for you all. But I think just like the lease standard, at the bottom line is not going to be a huge impact on your financial statements. So I think GASB 87, having implemented that, there's a really good framework for implementing this. So you'll see some of this next year. So that's all I have. Happy to take any more questions, comments.
if I could circle back just to add a little clarity. So I did pull up, TRS has a lot of different subcommittees, investment committees, those type of things, but they are governed by a board of trustees. That board of trustees are all governor appointed. There are a few of the positions that are governor appointed, but those are the positions that they ask the membership. The membership basically can nominate 3 people, and then the governor picks the appointment from the 3 people that the membership has voted for.
Gotcha. Okay.
Does it say what the total value is?
Oh,
of
it
their
may somewhere. I
immunity?
don't know. I just looked at the board of trustees.
Yeah.
I didn't look at the
Just
fund
curious.
value.
Any questions? All right. Thank you, Ms. Roberts.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to number 5, consider approval of recommendation of the district's 2022 annual comprehensive financial report to be presented to the Board of Trustees at the next regular meeting of the board. Do you have a motion?
We're just asking for a recommendation from the audit committee to recommend the ACFR for approval at the January board.
Ackford.
Yeah, one of y'all would make the motion.
Do you have a
Motion?
to a second?
Second.
Yeah, I'll second.
All right, there we go.
Motion, please vote by uplifted hands. All those in favor? Motion passes.
Ms. Roberts, thank you. We appreciate the work that you all do
Yep.
for us.
And
Thank
the
you.
audit committee, or
Yeah,
what you
the
guys
team
do.
is unbelievable.
The team's awesome.
Yes.
And so just for clarity's sake, so Ms. Roberts will be back next week and do a much briefer presentation for the entire board as they ask for approval than what she gave you all, the deeper dive look, but she'll be back. So.
Fantastic. All right, moving on to item 6, receive update on 2022-2023 internal audit plan. Hello there, good morning.
Chairman Chase.
Chase.
Members of the audit committee, Dr. Knoll, guests, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome.
Mr. Hayden, if maybe since we have new members on the audit committee, if you could maybe do an introduction yourself, your history, you have that in there? Perfect, thank you. Beautiful.
That's why you hired me.
That's right, indeed.
So that's why I wanted just to give a brief introduction of internal audit to our new members. So I'm Brian Hayden. I've been here for 3.5 years. I'm CPA, certified internal auditor, and a certified fraud examiner. We perform operational and financial audits, and what we don't do is like Weaver does the federal grants. We don't get into curriculum, we don't get into testing, things like that. So that's our purview, is operational financial. We have a co-source with Weaver, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Handle the administrative part, and I report to the audit committee and Dr. Knoll with a dotted line to Darren. I have a staff auditor. Her job is strictly the activity fund audits, and she also handles the PTOs. And that's a lot of work right there.
Yeah.
We have a co-source arrangement with Weaver, and what this means is, instead of hiring additional personnel for internal audit, when we need resources, we have a deal with Weaver, and they give us those resources as needed. This is incredibly helpful, especially in the IT area, where I don't have that expertise, and to hire that, even at the senior level, would be cost prohibitive. We couldn't afford it. And we have a fantastic working relationship with them. They know, obviously they know CISD really well. The people they give us are top notch. So it's been a great working relationship, and has really allowed us to go from kind of an activity fund based internal audit department when I arrived to now we're a full service internal audit department on level with our peers out there. We have 2 levels of report findings. So there's opportunities for improvement. Those are the findings that are higher risk, and they require management response. Then we have observations. Those are lower risk, and management response is optional, but most of the time they do. Our audits are conducted in accordance with the Internal Professional Practices Framework by the Institute of Internal Auditors, and our audit plan yearly is based on a risk assessment, so y'all will get that questionnaire that'll be coming out April-ish. And I encourage you all to fill it out, and if you have any areas you would really want us to look at, then let us know. But that's the time. And then in the May audit committee meeting, I'll bring the audit plan for you all to approve or not approve. Any questions on internal audit?
And just to make, he mentioned this, but I just want to highlight it more, is the kind of the scope of work in our internal audit department has really shifted in the last 3 to 4 years. It was primarily, as mentioned, a team that looked at activity funds on campuses almost exclusively, which is important. I mean, when you talk about a high school, you may have over $1 million in activity funds in a high school. But when you looked year over year, the amount of impact of observations or findings were very minimal. You might be talking about $1 million activity fund, and you'd find that $2,000 sales tax error or something like it was nothing that impactful. Part of the shift in with Brian's focus has been to look at major systems that can have giant impacts financially on the district. So you've seen IT audits, transportation, police department, these big payroll, big systems that PEMS, where there is a lot of money involved, a lot of if we have systemic errors or problems in those areas, it can be significant, and it's great opportunities for us to grow. So I think it's been a very healthy shift for us, so thank you for that.
Dr. Knoll, I do have
Yeah.
concern there because that is one area that I have had folks mention at the campus activities fund. So I don't know, you said roughly 3 years. That hasn't really been the focus?
No, we still do those. Like
Oh,
that
we
one
still-
lady, that's all she does. That used to be all we did.
Okay.
Were campus activity
Yeah.
funds.
Okay.
That's all
Yeah, I
we
just want to
do.
make sure we're still focused.
Oh yeah,
on
we
that.
are, absolutely.
I think we expanded it like 3.5 years ago.
We've just broadened our scope.
And the way we've been able to do that, continue to do activity funds plus these other possibly more impactful audit type activities, is by leveraging external providers to help
Correct.
us, correct?
Correct. And again, it saves the district money from hiring somebody, having to find a spot for them, which nowadays is problematic. And not that it's ever happened, but if they send us somebody we didn't like, we can send them right back. And you can't really do that when you hire somebody. So it's like in the IT audits, we get partners, we get subject matter experts that know their business, and we can leverage off that and really do some great audits for the district.
Perfect.
Go over the current audit plan. So far, we've completed 2 of the activity funds at Bozeman Intermediate and the Woodlands High School. We've completed the custodial maintenance audit. We found 2 areas of improvement. So the first is, went out to the warehouse and did a random count. Per the framework, if you do an inventory and you get a certain level of discrepancies, then you increase your population and see if, is this kind of a one-off or is this more systematic? So we found a 5% error rate to start with. We increased our population and ended up with a 12%. So they cycle, maintenance cycles through a ton of items through that warehouse, daily, weekly, monthly. What in the 12 calendar months before we did it, it was 13,000 items. So they do perform they were performing a semi-annual audit inventory, but what we suggested is they start doing a random monthly count, just to make sure, just like we did, to make sure that everything's working right. So I think what Marshall's done, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but like preventative maintenance, they'll get an alert saying this generator needs service. The warehouse people will get an alert every month saying it's time to do that audit.
Mhm.
We have
that
a
inventory.
we put a preventive maintenance work order system starting in October 1st. October 1st, we randomly selected 20 items, one count that was off, and then in November, December, and January, it was 20 random items, and it was
Is there are you finding any particular popular items that are popping up more often than others?
We have a pretty tight window on our warehouse. Most of what we see is, like during the freeze. So we kind of chose January 3rd very specifically because our warehouse wasn't open for that week. But the week after the freeze, we had 80 or 90 people working to get our schools back in shape. And so during that time when the warehouse manager is basically director or assistant director going in, we take it out of the warehouse, we write it on a sheet, and we leave it for the warehouse manager to input all that stuff the first day he gets back. We allowed him to put all this stuff in that January 3rd when we returned, and then ran them 20 items immediately after he completed putting his sheet in.
Mhm.
Okay.
So, as he said, tons of items going in and out in today's atmosphere where if you order a part, it takes you 3 months to get it. We can't wait that long.
Mhm.
So over time, in cooperation with Mr. Rice, we've been able to increase our warehouse stock so that we don't have to wait for those items and keep our schools out.
Okay.
Did you find any indications of the root cause for these?
No, I think it was just, so one item was pesticide, right? And they're in these boxes.
Yeah.
Of, I think it was 4 each in the box. I think what happened is somebody looked in the box and said, it's full, when it wasn't. Maybe had 1 in there. I'm trying to remember what the other items were, but I'm
But do you think this
A lot
is?
of the items that were found in our box. And
Uh,
so the box were just because we don't have room in our warehouse is very small, compact. As we move into our new warehouse, we're able to take items out of boxes and actually show
Yeah.
everything and actually have a physical count versus
yeah.
putting it in a box and stacking over to the side. So we're actually able
Yeah.
to see the actual product.
Yeah, the boxes were the problem. I mean,
Yeah.
people would open a box, they would take a couple things out and make, kind of close it, and it would look like the box hadn't been opened.
Yeah.
When we
Put
got out
under
there,
a closed box, put an open box in between 2 closed
Yeah.
boxes. We just take
Oh.
for granted that those are all closed boxes, and there's 4 per box.
Yep.
There's 3 boxes and there's 12. When actually there's 1 box open and 1 or 2 items have been taken out.
But and I saw the new building being built. It's going to be nice. Yeah. Just recently. But do you think it is a case of we are not getting shipped the right things, but still paying for it, or people are in a hurry, it's an urgent need, so they're just taking things off the shelf and not
I think
logging it, or
That's
do we have?
more than anything. Because when we receive it into the e-finance system. And then once we receive it in the e-finance system, we also, after that, we receive in the school due as the count and the quantity. And so we may have 100 items, and all 100 items, if we order 10 at a time, may be at a different cost.
Mhm.
So when we receive those in the school due, the way our system works is our guys have what we call truck pools. Our warehouse is the main pool. If I come in and I say I need 2 items, they take it out of the warehouse pool, they transfer it into a truck pool, and the only way that it comes off of their inventory is when they add it to a work order. When they add it to a work order, it comes off of their inventory, and then through finance and us, we pull a cost report, a warehouse report, and then they charge our budget based on what we use on the work orders itself.
So as a district, do we have an electronic tracking mechanism, or do they use paper copies?
Yeah, it's all electronic.
Yep.
We don't.
Even the work orders?
Probably this will probably be the only thing you see me having or carrying a piece of paper. Our guys work off of iPhones.
Okay.
So when our work orders are issued, they receive a work order, they put their time on the work order, they put their materials on a work order. If they purchase something from a vendor, they put that on that cost as well. If we need to pull a cost on what we spent in the maintenance department, we're able to pull that utilizing the work order.
So is there something in the process that needs to change to make it easier for hot jobs or urgent jobs to make
I think
sure
it's
they're
to get
reporting?
that space to be able to take things out of boxes, and then we
Yeah.
And assistant director's a little bit more involved in the monthly count, so he actually is the one that goes out and does the physical count. For us to do a physical count of our warehouse, we're shutting down our warehouse for a full day.
Yeah.
And that's kind of tough when you've got guys that are, you know, if you're standing at the counter and there's a guy coming in, there's an air conditioner broken, I need this part.
Sure.
It's kind of tough to shut down a warehouse to do a real physical count of the complete warehouse. We've done semi-annually since I've been here. But through mine, that we're starting to do the random tests on a monthly basis. To see if there's a root cause for it.
What was the adjustment amount for?
I'd have to get that information. I can't think of it. It was 12,000, something like that, I want to say.
Is there really high dollar items there?
There are.
Okay. And are those treated any differently?
We know they're on the shelf and they're in that warehouse space.
Okay.
The way we're set up right now, it's kind of everything's behind the fence and behind the door.
Yeah.
But you can't, if someone wants to get something, they're going to get it. We don't have adequate space. We don't have, but new warehouse space is definitely going to make a huge change. And give us the spaces for things out there to really count things and account for things.
When we did the count, you know, we did the higher dollar ones, right? We didn't go
Sure.
and count the washers. We were doing it, well, I mean, we got them in there.
Our
Right.
mix of the way we issue things out based on the way we use it. Wire nuts or concealable, and wire nuts are an example considered consumable. So we charge them out when we charge the whole box out.
Yeah.
500 wire nuts, we're not going to break out and say, here's 2 wire nuts.
No.
Yeah, electrician uses,
No.
you know, those, and we charge those out, and he takes them out of the warehouse, and they go directly to the floor. High dollar items or repetitive items. Our warehouse system is set up so that if we increase those numbers, so minimum stock. So if it takes me 6 months to get that part and I use 6 in 6 months, my stock, my number of items that I keep in stock goes up to 12 or 15 because it only takes me 6 months to get that item in. So our system tells us what we need to order based on our high-low numbers that we set inside our warehouse.
And the safety stuff, yeah.
The second finding was we looked at accident reports. We had to expand the scope of that a little just to get enough to look at. I mean, it's a good thing. They don't have a lot of accidents. So we reviewed the reports from January 2021 through August 2022, and 37% error rate on those. So there are parts of them that weren't filled out. If there's an accident, there's supposed to be and the driver was at fault, or the maintenance person, they're supposed to do a random drug test right away. That wasn't always noted, so it was just items like that. Yes. So there was, and some there wasn't just the proper paperwork with the report, that there should have been pictures of the accident, things like that. So what our recommendation was, you need to train your supervisors to make sure that these are all filled out completely and that they're reviewed by somebody above them to make sure that they're filled out completely.
What was the misunderstanding there? Like, why not?
So it's kind of splintered in that we have to be careful with the drug test is one thing, because we don't get the drug test, they go directly to HR transportation. Yeah, their drug test, I think they go directly to HR. That's a protection of privacy on our employees. So we don't get those, so we probably don't keep those in files. Those would probably only be sent to me if there was an issue, if we found the finding. So we wouldn't keep that in that accident quote. As far as any However, we've not moved them out of the next to last section. We've had 4 minor accidents since October. And those are still residing in that final folder before it goes to an archive folder, electronic archive folder. And in each step, there's a notification to myself and the assistant director. And we're going to check to make sure all of those items in before it goes into the insurance claim and before it goes into the archive.
So for instance, the drug test is happening?
Well,
We
Or-
don't always have to happen. So there's 2, it's a yes for 1 of 2 questions. Either it was an at-fault accident by a driver, or
Yes.
The accident, the officer that was called to the scene. And we always use Conroe ISD Police Department on any accident, whether we're at fault or not at fault. They come to the scene and give us a case number just in case. Or if it's either determined it's their fault by the officer, or that the driver contributed to the accident.
so I would look at the form, and they wouldn't have at fault checked off at all. So you couldn't tell whether it was an at fault or not.
Mhm.
And I think a couple of them, they had the at fault check, but they didn't check off that the drug test was performed. And then there were other ones where just the whole sections weren't filled. So that's what we found.
And you reviewed all the accident reports?
All of them for that time period, every single one.
Okay.
And there was 19
And
of them.
over a third of them had issues?
Errors.
Yes.
Yeah.
Does that seem high? Is
It
that,
seems
Yes.
high,
Yes.
yes.
I'm trying to figure out.
But a lot of it, again, was just, they didn't fill out the form properly.
Well, that's what we're trying to get to.
Yeah.
Like, how much of it is a documentation, and how much is there like a systemic issue in the process and risk because the process wasn't followed was created?
It was more not filling up
Okay.
the accident form properly. That was probably 75% of it, and 25% of it was the
Okay.
documentations with it were not there.
So,
We're not
do
complete.
we have any, I'm sorry, were you saying, okay. So, do we have any, like, liability from an insurance perspective because we're not documenting appropriately? Like, what is the so what there? Okay.
Yes. I mean, if the driver is supposed to take a drug test, didn't, goes out and
Yeah.
something worse happens,
Uh-huh.
yeah.
Then we failed to identify it when we should have.
So, well, but I don't want to imply that they didn't do the drug
Yeah,
test. It
right.
just wasn't
Noted.
marked, and so we couldn't tell. Again, that's an error, right, if you don't fill out the required documentation
Yeah.
correctly.
Is there a way we can match up between HR records and these missing accidents where drug tests may have been performed? At
We
least
should-
for the ones that do have a mark
Yeah,
at fault?
yeah. And those all yeah. The
We
ones
can
where
match-
they actually were marked,
Where they actually were
they
marked?
had the drug test.
Okay,
So.
so it's just the ones that had no markings,
you
we
didn't
don't know,
Right.
could have been at fault, and
Could have
drug
been,
tests
could
should have
have
been
not been.
done, but we
Yeah.
don't know
Yeah.
what.
We kind of improve our process to make sure that connection is made. So if during the review of the form, or if they answered yes to either of the questions very early in the process, as soon as the accident is submitted, we're going to see that and move that along and reach out to HR and ask for that.
Yeah.
Not necessarily put it in a folder.
No,
Right.
no,
We'd
no.
probably move it into a folder after it went into the archive that only myself and the assistant director have access to.
Just as long as it's notated.
Yeah, is there a way on that electronic form to make that required data entry? Okay,
Yeah, it's a checkbox where they have to.
either at fault or
It's
not
either
at
a yes or
fault.
a no or a
Yes,
no.
all right. And then is there a process then for yourself or someone in your leadership team to then review all the accident reports that come through?
Yes.
Okay.
In that process, both me and there's only 2 in the leadership team that should If both of us give them, if we document share,
Okay.
anytime it moves into a different folder, it automatically sends both of us a notification, giving us the title, what it is, and the required review.
Okay. Interesting. Thank
That's
you.
why we do these audits.
Yeah. So I understand or get the point at fault where it could also open us up to some liability, but also for one, just for the well-being of the employee, right? We should have
Absolutely.
complete and accurate records in case they have any, injuries or ongoing issues from that accident. So. All right. What do we do? Do we go back and try and complete those records, or we just move on, or?
We've added some of those documents that were missing.
Okay.
If most of the ones we knew what the case was.
Sure.
That it wasn't, as our vehicle backed into a personal vehicle in our parking lot.
Yeah.
We knew there wasn't. We just, like you said, the box just wasn't checked.
How many vehicles do we have?
In our fleet, it's about 168, I think it is, in the
Okay.
white fleet, and that's just in maintenance and custodian.
All right. Operating every day around the clock, so the rate of accidents is fairly low. Yeah.
And one of those was in a parking lot, one back into a sign, and the other one was an accident where someone ran into the back of them, and it was no one's fault. They were stopped at a red light, and the car plowed into the back of the person was texting while driving. Damaged our vehicle, they're responsible for it.
Yeah.
Our guy was injured, so he did have to go, even though it wasn't his fault.
Yeah.
He had to answer yes to the question, so he did have to go take care of this.
Yeah, you think of how many miles they put on.
Yeah,
That
for
we've had
sure.
19 accidents, that's pretty darn good.
Yeah, I think so.
So,
What's interesting to me is, as often as I'm up at Home Depot, I never see your trucks up there. So that's
Well,
pretty
they got a
impressive to
big
me.
warehouse.
I know, that's what I'm saying, they never go up.
The other side, Home Depot is a difficult vendor to keep awarded, if you will. We do a lot of those, but we do have a lot of the stock. We try to keep our guys what we call dashboard time.
Yeah.
If I can keep a guy from going to mechanical support and I keep donuts in the morning.
You're doing a pretty good job.
I say 30 minutes or 45 minutes that he can work on equipment. So we try to keep as much, and not to mention that most of the stuff that we need has very long lead items right now. So the more we can keep, if it's a one-time item that has a warranty on it, we're probably not going to keep it in the warehouse. Because we may use it in a year, and by the time that we use it, the warranty's out. So the things that don't hold the warranty, those are the things that we try to keep in stock.
Gotcha.
And anything that Plain Construction takes out of commission, we rob and steal every part that we can. We'll talk about our attic stock here in a few minutes. That's where all that comes from. We take those parts out of there.
any other questions on finding number 2? Move on to the observations. So, Marshall mentioned attic stock. So when we build a school or renovate or whatever, there's leftover paint, there's leftover tiles, doorknobs, doors, things like that. They go to the warehouse and they're put into what's called attic stock. And as needed, they're pulled out, and if a doorknob needs to be replaced, they've got them. But when we did the audit, there was no procedure in place to track when these items were taken out of stock. Now, there's zero price because we've already paid for it.
Yeah, we've already paid for it.
So they go into there at zero cost. So we just want to make sure that they're not walking out to be doing somebody's home renovation, right? So our recommendation was you have to put a control in place that tracks when those items are used.
And we're not doing anything with that yet. We're going to wait till we move into our new place. And we bought racks and not necessarily, there's so many different parts that you can't really put a part number per se on every item.
Right.
So we bought steel racks that we can lock put inside our warehouse. We don't have, it's not in our warehouse now, it's in lockups that our old chiller. So we want all the electronic boards, a lot of the components that we can't buy anymore because they're no longer in stock, but we still have chillers that can use those parts, but I can't buy that part anymore. So we'll go grab those off before they demo them or before the contractor takes them off site, and we'll put them in our attic stuff. New warehouse, what we'll do is we'll put them in a stock, and it'll be, if there's 75 pieces in there, there's going to be an accounting for 75 pieces, not a different department for each different piece. But at least there's an accounting on how many pieces, and it'll be behind, inside our warehouse where it's controlled by warehouse.
So you have the functionality or the system, does the system you use to track your inventory allow you to put in zero cost items?
Yeah, we absolutely, yes ma'am. So
Okay.
it does a cost, we put our cost in on every, like you mentioned earlier, we may have 100 different items at 100 different costs.
Sure.
We buy one at a time.
Yeah.
And it does an average cost, so if I have 100 items and, each one of them's $1, then it's $1 per cost. But if I have the first 100 at $1 and the second 100 at $2, then it's gonna be $1.50 per item as they check out of the warehouse. So we can put them into our system at whatever cost. It'll just be one for each group.
Okay.
One part number for HVAC, one part number for general maintenance, one part number for electrical department. The biggest thing is it's gonna be behind the control of the warehouse.
Do you have a specific person or resource that is responsible for the inventory?
Inside the warehouse, yes ma'am.
Okay.
Inside their attic stock, their
Okay.
lockups, no ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes ma'am.
All right.
They're just in their lockups where they can go and get parts as they need them. So they overstock.
Perfect. Thank you.
And the last one, and we've already touched on this, so the accident reports, they were doing paper and electronic. Well, our observation is pick one. And obviously electronics the way to go, so that's what they've chosen to do. It's just no need to do double work.
Agreed.
I do want to...
Resistance of personnel who don't like it.
I understand.
Some people like paper.
Change management is hard.
Can't move outside of paper. 11 years behind.
I do want to point out that you think of everything that maintenance and custodial does, preventative maintenance to just all the work orders and all the rooms that they clean, it's massive. This is a clean audit for such a big organization. And I mean, it's really well run, it's well controlled. So I just want to make sure the audit committee sees the context here. I mean, we have findings, but it's a big operation that's really well run.
Yeah. That's good to
I want to
hear.
say, Curtis, you might be able to help me out on this. I know Marshall won't say anything, but there was an award he received not too long ago for something about from the state of Texas.
Marshall was a state finalist. I don't know, I'm gonna get it wrong, but a top 2 state finalist for from TASBO, which is the organization that is the leadership of operations management teams across the state. And Marshall was recognized by that organization as one of the very best, and which we know and we appreciate. So absolutely.
Great. Well, now you have an independent review to affirm that as well. So, thank you very much. Yeah.
Now, Mr. Hayden, are these chosen at random, the audits, the internal audits?
What we do is each year we'll send out a risk assessment on all the different areas, so IT, maintenance, child nutrition, police, transportation, all the different departments that we audit. Again, like I said, curriculum, things like that, we don't get into. It goes out to Dr. Knoll, to Darren, to all the higher ups, and they rank what they think the risk is in each of those areas. We add up all that, and we say, hey, here's the highest risk ones. Now, in the matter of something like maintenance, well, we're not going to do it again next year. So we kind of look back and see, okay, when was the last time this was done, and we'll pick from there. And but the audit committee does vote to say yes or no on that that audit plan. Band instruments.
Our favorite topic.
Our favorite topic. This, for our new members, this has been a 2-year trial and error, and Dr. Horton and I have worked really hard on this. The results of this audit, I think, is proof of concept of what we're doing. And you know, when we started out 2 years ago, if all the band instruments are supposed to be put in what's called the CHARMS inventory. It's an electronic app that we have that tracks all that, right? When we started, people were using their own Excel spreadsheets and not at all. And in 2 years, we've managed to get everyone on CHARMS. We've managed to get guidelines in place that say this is how you're supposed to do it. And we've whittled down the errors to where out of 2,752 instruments, 7 were missing.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That's a huge improvement.
0.25%.
Huge improvement.
And I'll tell you, any business would love to have that kind of shrinkage, right? So this was all the junior highs and the intermediates and the K through 6. Dr. Horton and I personally go out to each of these schools. I hand him an inventory sheet, and he does it right with me. And what we've done now is we've got a process in place. We've got the guidelines in place. So we had 7 missing items. Band instruments are expensive, right? So just those 7 items are $35,000. We added, they're already there, but they just weren't on CHARMS. 63 instruments worth $156K. And then updates, which is they had the wrong serial number or the wrong manufacturer or the wrong description. That was all cleaned up. So at this point, internal audit is going to step back, and next year it's up to the schools to follow the guidelines. Then every other year, internal audit, Dr. Horton will go in and do these inventories. Just to keep everybody on their toes, but we really it's labor intensive. It really is. So we want to make sure that we had everything in place, everything cleaned up before we kind of turned it over to the schools. So I think we're in that spot. Sure.
A couple of comments. Thank you all so much for letting me speak to this a little bit. In the month of beginning at the very end of October all the way through the month of November, we physically visited 22 campuses, and with the presence of the teachers, physically inventoried with them every single thing. Mr. Hayden would send the any of the findings, discrepancies, whatever back. They had a defined period of time. It took us a couple of weeks after that to sort of chase all of that, no pun intended, to get it cleaned up, and these are the final results. Another piece of context that probably should be mentioned here is, you know, that we grew out of the high school audits where we have big findings because we have, again, 2,800 just high school level instruments. At the 5 through 8, there had never been any formal audit. And so this became a priority of ours right about the time Mr. Hayden started, that we do this to guarantee, because we have an incredibly large, 5,600 instruments that are at the level that would be considered capital outlay. So in other words, these are not hand drums or rhythm sticks or small items that are almost either consumable or certainly, are not of the level of expenditure where you would be asking for funding for those. We actually delayed any instrument purchases 2 times based on findings of these until we could get it all cleaned up, because we also didn't want to purchase things that we already had. So So, another point of context is the teachers at these 5 through 8 campuses that we did, we've had about a 40% turnover just in the last 5 years. Because they, kind of like Ms. Roberts was saying with their team, advancement or people come, they career change, things like that. We have a lot of new teachers who had never done this process, and they took it very seriously. So we were incredibly proud of our staff, our Conroe ISD teachers, for recognizing the gravity of the situation and being willing to be very intentional about being prepared for us, because we would send them, here's what we want to see, here's the order in which we want to see it. And we heard lots of stories of them coming in nights, weekends, before school, after school, way out of their contract hours to be prepared for these. And when we got there, I think the fastest one was like 9 minutes. And then we had some that lasted up to an hour or more, where we physically counted instruments. Another part of the context is we have all different size schools, and we have all different size instrumental programs. So some of them have a very limited inventory, but some of them have 7 or 8 pages of Excel spreadsheet that we printed out of the charm system. So age of school also matters too, because when your school's been there 35 years, you've accumulated things and cycled out of some things. The funniest part to us was people that were like, well, I didn't get rid of it because I knew I shouldn't get rid of it. And we're like, but it's in 7 pieces in the case. It can't be fixed. It can't be repaired. They're like, so I can get rid of it. We're like, you can't use it. You have to. So there's an education piece that goes with this for our teachers, and honestly for our building administrators too, that propels us into this next season where at the campus level, there's an increased level of communication between the teachers and the administrators, and the accountability is there at the campus. And then we're doing more of a random for a year and then go back and do a full, right? Yeah. So I know that's a lot of explanation, but it feels so good to say this is where we are right now.
Yeah.
The added, I do want to mention one other thing. A lot of times kids begin band in 5th, 6th, 7th, or 8th grade. 5th, 6th, 7th, or 8th grade, and then they don't stay with it. And many times their parents or guardians say, look, my kid isn't going to play trumpet anymore, can I give you this trumpet? So that's where a lot of these added instruments came from too, is that they were donations or campus level purchases. Or we've also had instrument drives from community for campuses in need as well. So I've said a lot.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, Dr. Horton, I appreciate the sense of urgency that was spurred by the results from the original band instrument audit, and I think this represents taxpayers' money, and it represents places we can't spend other places because we're replacing instruments, and on behalf of the board too, we just really appreciate how serious this was taken. Yeah.
It's great working with Dr. Rudney. That's one of the things that I'm proudest of in the internal audit is the level of cooperation and that we've been able to get among the different departments. And Marshall, same way, just great working relationships with everybody. We're all pulling for the same thing. He asked you to do the best.
Yeah, for sure.
Brian, do you now feel like if he lined up all of the instruments, you could label each one of them? You could say which one is which now?
Can you play them yet? Have you learned how to play them all yet, Brian?
Any other questions on the band instruments? You won't be hearing about it for a couple of years.
Well, that's great. Thank you.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so remaining audit plan, child nutrition. I'm working on the work program right now, and this is going to be very school-centric because the cash is collected at the schools, the inventory is done at the schools, so that's why we're going to, and this is where having a Weaver resource really helps. This way we can kind of divide and conquer and get a lot more schools in the same amount of time that it would take me to do half of them. So it's going to be the state and the feds come in and they audit child nutrition to death over nutritional values and compliance with Fed regulations, state. So we're really not getting into that much. It's going to be cash controls and inventory controls. The food is delivered to the individual schools, and that's where it's kept. So that's where we're going to focus. It's where the cash is taken, counted, and there's big processes that are written down, so there's a lot to audit just on those two items. IT, we're going to do the cybersecurity plan. Again, Weaver will be leading that. We have a new cybersecurity plan that was put out, I think, in December, and so they're going to look at it, compare it to best in class, and go good. But that's more the Weaver resources. I do the administrative part of it, make sure everyone's at the meetings that needs to be, any documents that they need, I try to get for them to try to keep the costs down of what we're paying them. So anything that I can do, I'd rather have them out actually doing the field work than scheduling meetings. So we got that going, and then I think that kicks off in February. Then we have our follow-up for last year's IT general controls, which was a huge audit with 14 findings, opportunities, because we'd never done one before, and that was part of the problem. So that is going to be a big follow-up.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's going to take a lot of time. Again, that's kind of scheduled for February, and that's a separate team so that's Maribel and Rima.
It's the same from
Yeah,
last, yeah,
right.
good, all right.
And that's what I like. We have the same people come in, and like, again, that know our systems and know me, know the team out here. Then the Caney Creek High School remodel, as we do every year, we try, when there's either construction or a large remodel, we internal audit looks at the numbers, make sure everything's correct. And then the summertime is usually our time for doing the follow-up audits. So we'll have the police follow-up. That was an audit in 2021. We do an annual PEMS, which is attendance, that's how we get our money from the state. So we make sure that our attendance is being taken correctly, that it's being taken, and that's every year we do that.
Got
And
a
that's
busy
it.
year.
We're busy, but
Awesome.
like I said, having Weaver, it's a way to go. Any other questions for him?
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Just to follow up on our previous question, Mr. Hubert, TRS has $195 billion invested.
Just a bit, yeah.
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit.
All right.
That's like GDP of
Right.
many countries. All right. Last item. Confirm next scheduled meeting on Wednesday, May 10th, 2023 at 7:30 a.m. That seems so far away.
They'll be here before you know it.
I'll be here soon.
Yeah, is that good for everyone?
Yeah.
Yeah? All right. All right, then, do you have a motion to adjourn?
A motion to adjourn?
A second?
Yeah.
That's right.
All right.
Thank you all very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everybody.
Bye.